Zendro official. Zendro official. Zendro official YouTube page.
Proceed by inviting the rest of our colleagues to the stage as well to proceed into the mid-demo presentations. Can you please join us? So we have Abba Bayo, Investment Commissioner, who's going to be presenting on the basics of mid-demo. We also have Dr. Namerra Mammo, who's an economic expert at the Office of the Prime Minister, who's going to be presenting on mid-demo and economics. And we have Dr. Gedeon Timotheos, who's the Deputy Attorney General, who's going to be presenting on mid-demo and politics. Okay, so the short briefing is really to acquaint you with the concept of mid-demo, which is an Amharic word really loosely translating into synergy. And as had been indicated at the beginning by State Minister Marcos Rique, the concept is based on the Prime Minister's book that was launched a few weeks ago. And mid-demo is the basis for the administration's continuing reforms as well. So this is why we thought it's important to engage you in dialogue and an understanding of what's going to be the underpinning or the foundation of the continuing reforms as well. So the presentations on mid-demo will focus on mid-demo as a way of life, in addition to Ethiopia's political, economic, and foreign relations roadmap. So I will begin by inviting Abba Bayo, who's going to be giving us it will be about 20 minutes each for each of the presentations before we go for coffee break, and then we'll come back to a Q&A on it. But Abba Bayo is going to be presenting on the basics of mid-demo.
My name is Abba. I know many of you in my capacity as a commissioner of the Ethiopia Investment Commission, and I would like to use this opportunity actually to extend my heartfelt gratitude for all the support that you provide us and for the excellent partnership that we forge with you all in our effort to attract foreign direct investment into Ethiopia. But today, I'm not going to pledge your support in attracting investment. I will be addressing you on the mid-demo conception, I'll lay the fundamentals, what mid-demo is, and the essential conditions that are outlined under it. It's actually the first time that this presentation is being delivered in the English language, and I hope we have done justice to the book of His Excellency Prime Minister Dr. Abiy. I'll translating it, and you can name the risk of not doing so. So will do our level best to present it in the space of 20 minutes that have been allocated to us. Normally, this would take an hour and 30 minutes. So the presentation outline includes number one, point of departure. Why do we need actually Meddemer as a conception to govern government policies? As was earlier indicated, Meddemer is not just a philosophical thought. It's actually going to be the governing philosophy that will define the economic approach, the political approach, as well as our foreign relations is going to be defined by the Meddemer conception. So its significance cannot be overstated. So I'll explain why we need Meddemer in the first place. And then, of course, just like any political ideology, like any political philosophy, we will need to understand the linkage between Meddemer and human nature. What is it in the human nature that signifies the importance of Meddemer? So in that, we will look into the needs of human beings. We will look into the characteristics of human beings. We will also look into the human potentials, which will define the contents of Meddemer. And of course,
Zendro
the big elephant in the room. What's
official
Meddemer?
YouTube page.
Is it, as was indicated, synergy, or does it actually go beyond and above synergy? So we'll discuss the meaning of Meddemer in this setting. And then the premises of Meddemer. For Meddemer, what are the underlying premises of Meddemer? What motivated the government into calling for Meddemer? I think that's where we'll be discussing the premises of Meddemer. And then we have 6 pillars of Meddemer, which we call the 6 S's of Meddemer. We will discuss each one by one. And then we'll also address the fundamentals of Meddemer, or the essential conditions that will determine the success or otherwise of Meddemer. And finally, we will look into the goals of Meddemer. Eventually, what do you actually seek to achieve through this philosophical conception called Meddemer? What are the objectives of Meddemer? This will be discussed in my last slide. So the point of departure is this. If you look at the history of Ethiopia, and probably the history of many of our African countries, it's the case that we get to import ideologies and philosophies and economic thoughts from elsewhere and struggle to adapt it to the conditions in the country. That's been the case in Ethiopia for so long, for instance, with our attempt to adopt capitalism or socialism or mixed economy, or the last 27 years revolutionary democracy. The effort that we have been trying to do was to implant a system that originated in a completely different context, that doesn't even look into the prevailing realities in Ethiopia, and that has resulted into so many misgivings, so many failures, so many injustices in the society. That's why His Excellency the Prime Minister, when he came up with the idea of Meddemer, he sought to actually strike a balance between the need to adopt foreign values, foreign concepts, to that of reflecting the prevailing reality in Ethiopia. So this is, a call for a solution based on prevailing national circumstances, and it also seeks to take into account the nature of human beings. I think here it may be worthwhile to quote one of the most consequential leaders of the 20th century, Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping is quoted to have said, "Leaders must cross the river by feeling for the stones." That's the kind of pragmatism Maddemer brings into the table. We have to keep our feet on the ground. We have to feel for the thorn. We have to feel for the slippery slopes. We have to feel for the stones. We have to always be mindful of the practical reality under our feet. So whenever we try to adapt a solution, it should be with the conception that that solution takes into account the prevailing reality in Ethiopia. It shouldn't be just, a prescription of a foreign solution based on an abstract ism. It should reflect the prevailing situation in Ethiopia. That's why Maddemer tries to understand the prevailing situation in Ethiopia. It also finds solutions from the knowledge base, from the wisdom that the society has accumulated over the years, but it doesn't completely ignore ideas, thoughts, experiences that may have worked in other countries. To the extent that there is a need to adopt practices, policies that have been effectively implemented in other countries, it does so, but having regard to the prevailing reality in Ethiopia. So the first thing that Maddemer does is it tries to look into human nature. So the whole idea of politics is to provide solution for human needs. And it tries to define what these needs are. It also looks into human characteristics. I think human characteristics have been defined by so many philosophers, and Maddemer also tries to look into these human characteristics as it outlines solutions for the Ethiopian situation. And of course, human potential should also be viewed in the context of Maddemer for all the policies that it prescribes. So in terms of human needs, it broadly categorizes human needs into two, direct and indirect needs. When it talks about direct need, it refers to the need for sustenance and self-preservation. Every human being, almost out of an innate nature, wants to protect himself or herself from any danger. That's, I think, the first need that's clearly outlined as part of the human needs. And of course, there is also the indirect need, which includes basic human needs, the shelter, water, and all other basic human needs. And then human beings do not just live for water, food. You may be able to actually meet this basic human need, but if you deny them the freedom, if you deny them the liberty, there is a chance that you're going to create problems. So for so long, there has been a tendency to actually overlook this aspect of human needs and unduly emphasize the need for addressing basic human needs. If you look at Ethiopia's experience over the last 27 years, we were so proud of implementing an economic, achieving an economic growth that by any standard can be considered remarkable. It's, I think, a good thing that we've been able to achieve on average double-digit growth for the last decade and a half. But again, this overlooked the need for its citizens to have freedom, to exercise full freedom, to exercise their liberty. And it doesn't matter how much you have actually been able to fulfill the basic human needs, sooner or later, there is going to be a demand for respect for freedom, respect for liberty. So these indirect human needs are all taken into account as Maddemer seeks to provide solution for all the ills that affect us, for all the ills that affect our society. So from the perspective of Maddemer, these human needs, whether we call them direct or indirect needs, are considered to be intertwined. And when you actually seek to address one human need, you may be able to compromise on other needs. So there is a need to strike a balance in your effort to addressing these needs. Each need requires an equal amount of attention by the government. But as you strive to addressing these needs, there is always a likelihood of one need running into a negation of the other. So there is an attempt to strike a balance. You will see it later on that one of the fundamental features of Meddamar is there is a need to creating a balancing solution for every problem that's affecting the country. It seeks to create an equilibrium situation, whether it's in understanding human needs or any other solution that it seeks to provide. The fundamental foundation lies on creating that equilibrium, that balancing act that's needed. So it calls that our fates are intertwined, and the preferred pathway to fulfill our needs is Meddamar. And then, of course, human characteristics is also taken into account. Some people think, human beings are irrational, they are selfish, they are greedy. We have also philosophers that made that kind of assessment. If you look at, the assessment by, for instance, Thomas Hobbes, he categorizes human beings as selfish, irrational. On the contrary, if you look at, the philosophical thought by Plato, he calls human beings, inherently rational. Now, we cannot categorically put every human being in one basket. As we try to seek a solution that perfectly adapts to the situation in Ethiopia, we need to understand that this is a world where bad and good people live. This is a world where both Hitler and Mahatma Gandhi lived on. So let's not just categorically put everyone in one basket as we try to come up with a solution for whatever problem that we have as a nation. In fact, what it calls for is, as part of this Meddamar exercise, we should nurture traits, behaviors that are considered to be good and create a society that can live in a harmonious relationship. That's what Meddamar seeks to achieve. And then, of course, human potential is also part of the equation, as Meddamar's outline is a solution both for political problems, also for the economic problems and other problems that the country has. So the human potential, humans have the free will to determine their future. They have the capacity to change their course. They have the capacity and ability to determine their future. That's the underpinning of Meddamar. We are not inclined into believing that humans are governed by the action and reaction of physics. Human beings have the full potential, whose full potential can actually be also harnessed towards the end goal of bringing good results in a country. That's what Meddamar outlines. Now, having said this, what is Meddamar? I'll try to briefly summarize the meaning of Meddamar as clearly captured in the book by the Prime Minister. So Meddamar has, three components or three features. The first aspect is what we call bringing together good ideas, good people, good finance, whatever is present today, which is so essential for the betterment of this nation, will have to be collected, brought together, and used for good end. That's what bring together means. In Amharic, we call this mesebseb. And it looks into the present day Ethiopia, where we should be able to bring together ideas, resources, knowledge, capabilities of actors. Whether it's a former opposition turned out to be an ally like Obolenjo, or anyone who has who is ready to shake hands, the government should work closely with everyone that has good ideas, that has resources, that has the finance. That's what the first aspect of Meddamar is. Let's not reject people on account of factors that are not really important. Let's actually bring together ideas. Let's bring together resources. Let's bring knowledge. Let's effectively utilize the capabilities of various actors. That's the first aspect of Meddamar. The second aspect is what we define it to be accretion. In Amharic, this is referred to as makamachet, and it pertains more to the past. Whatever we have done in the past has to be built upon. We should not be in the business of starting from scratch. If you look at the history of Ethiopia, there is a tendency for every leader, forget every leader, even every minister that comes after another, tends to ignore everything that has been done by the predecessor and starts from the scratch. And look what we have as a nation. So instead of actually starting from scratch, instead of demolishing what has been done in the past, let's build on the good things. Let's build on the successes that have been achieved. And that's what accretion is about. Let's strive for accretion based on previous achievements and by rectifying mistakes. Now, in the Ethiopian context, one, for instance, can refer to this exercise to implement federalism in Ethiopia, which is an excellent political virtue one can call. Within the Ethiopian reality, federalism, at least to the present day Ethiopia, is the only solution that one should advocate for. And despite all what the naysayers say, the Prime Minister is a full champion of federalism.
Zendro
You can't find any better federalist than him. His only sin is he's calling to perfect this federalism that has been implemented in the past, to fill the gaps, to fill the mistakes that have been implemented over the past decade, and in fact, 3 decades one can call. So federalism, the successive economic growth that this government has achieved should also be built upon, and whatever mistakes that may have been done in the past have to be corrected. That's what accretion is about. So this vertical summation, vertical togetherness, builds on past achievements, ideas, by coalescing them with new ones. So the whole point being, it's about building capital. Let's bring together ideas, resources. Let's do accretion, and then eventually it will result into accumulation. Now, accumulation is often used within the context of capital, but in this particular case, whether it's political reform or judicial reform or whatever form of reform we are talking about, can actually be explained in terms of accumulation. Let's build on whatever past achievements that have been done in this exercise to build a nation, in this exercise to come up with also a legitimate government. So in a country where you have a low foundational capacity, which would mean you have been actually starting from scratch every time you get things wrong, then you have a very low foundational capacity, and your effort to achieve prosperity will become extremely difficult. So that's why you should always build on the past successes to ensuring that that elusive prosperity will be a reality. So this low foundational capacity can be made high foundational capacity if you have actually been accumulating on all past success, on all good ideas, virtues, resources that you've had in the past. So capital built over time, transformation would be much easier, and prosperity would be within the grasp of this country. So what are the fundamental objectives of Maddamer? Okay, Maddamer means bringing together ideas, resources, people. It's about accretion, it's about accumulation, but what does it actually seek to achieve to this particular country? There are 3 fundamental objectives that Maddamer seeks to achieve. Number 1, it's about maintaining and building positive political and economic achievements. So past, whether it's economical, historical, political, will be built upon. We're not going to start from scratch. We're not going to undo everything that has been done. We would rather perfect the imperfect, and we'll build on it. That's the first objective of Maddamer. The second is, as a nation, there have been a number of mistakes that have been done, historical mistakes that have costed us a lot as a nation. Those mistakes have to be acknowledged. Those mistakes have to be corrected, rectified. That's, again, one other objective of Maddamer. And, of course, the third objective is we need to fulfill interests and aspirations of future generation. This is not just about today. We should look into the future, and the future of the next generation should have a very good foundation. And that's one other objective of Maddamer. And eventually, of course, we will have a democratically prosperous nation, and that's the objective of Maddamer. So what are the premises of Maddamer? Why does Maddamer signify there is actually a need for it? Number 1, I think there is what's called social isolation, or you might call it alienation. Now, any individual would feel alone, would feel empty to lead life just as one individual. It's the same with countries. You know, you negotiate treaties, bilateral, regional, or multilateral treaties, so that actually you can bring ideas, resources, experts together to find a lasting solution for whatever problem you might have encountered as countries. Similarly with Madamar, it believes that there is social isolation. There is a need to come into togetherness. There is a need for accretion. There is a need for accumulation, and that is a result of this social isolation that would otherwise come if people were left alone to their own mercy. And of course, it also acknowledges that events are intertwined, not isolated. If you look at, for instance, the event that was briefly explained earlier by my colleagues Bilene and Obolenjo, people would say this is a result of the economic malaise that this country has had over the last few years. Or people may say, oh, it's because we have not been able to create enough number of jobs for the youth that they are actually busy throwing stones at each other. Yes, that's part of the explanation. But part of the explanation could as well be that the way we have been implementing or realizing human rights in Ethiopia, you know, people have not really enjoyed their freedom for so long that the moment they just feel left for their, you know, the moment they feel like they have actually that right, they tend to they tend to misunderstand the extent to which they can enjoy these rights. I think that's a politically correct way of putting it. The point being, you cannot understand situations in isolation. Events are intertwined, and it's not isolated. And of course, Madamar is harmony created through common shared understanding. It doesn't try to bring oneness in this nation. It actually celebrates diversity. So the whole point is, because there is this social isolation, human beings are always in a sphere of either competition or cooperation. And what Madamar seeks to achieve is, we need to actually balance our level of competition and our level of cooperation as we try to address any problems that we may have as a country. If it is just unbridled competition, you will end up, you know, having loss instead of filling gaps. It will result in greediness, despair, self-isolation, destruction, and it would be a complete resistance to any change that we are seeking to achieve through this Madamar. And of course, competition is also good. As economists often say, competition spurs efficiency. So inadequate competition is not also a good thing. So we should always strike that balance, because inadequate competition means quick satisfaction. We would be resistant to change, and it also would result in social isolation, hence failure. And then this competition versus cooperation, if we have a boundless cooperation, then that would also mean effortless success, sense of, you know, entitlement, dependency, not valuing perseverance. This would be a result of boundless cooperation. If you just give everything for your friend or your brother or your sister or your son or daughter, that will only create a
official. Zendro official YouTube page.
effortless success, sense of, entitlement, dependency, not valuing perseverance. This would be a result of boundless cooperation. If you just give everything for your friend or your brother or your sister or your son or daughter, that will only create a sense of dependency in them. So this boundless cooperation, whether it's applied to human beings or for that matter, even among states, will result eventually in failure. And then inadequate cooperation is also not a good thing. So finally, what we're trying to seek and to achieve is we need to balance the competition and cooperation that we're trying to implement in a country. This can apply for the political competition that this country may have among the different opposition parties in Ethiopia, or as we call them, competing political parties. So let me just briefly go through the 6 S's of Madamar. I'm told I think I only have 5 minutes. So there are 6 pillars of Madamar, include these 6 S's. Number 1 is synoptic. Number 2, synchronization, synthesis, symmetry, symbiosis, and system. I'll discuss each one by one. Synoptic, when we talk about synoptic, I think I mentioned earlier that we don't need to see things in isolation. I think we need to have a very comprehensive look at to issues. So we need to strive for additional outcomes by looking at the relations and the interactions of issues instead of viewing each individually. If you look at these individuals whose eyes are folded, and if they are asked to only touch a part of the elephant, they are likely to misdiagnose what this animal is. One who may be touching the rope would say this is a rope. The other may say this is a wall. Another would say this is a fan, and the like. So this misdiagnosis is a result of not having a synoptic view of the matter. And I think this problem can also manifest itself the way we articulate and understand political problems, economic problems, and the like. Synchronization is the second pillar of Madamar, or we call it synergy. This seeks to strive for a common goal, act in unison, synchronize, conquer, coordinate. These are the defining elements of synchronization. If you look at, for instance, the musical instruments, if some artists were to play certain musical instruments, unless they synchronize those musical instruments, the voice, the sound that's going to come out of these musical instruments will be completely unpleasant to the ear. So synchronization is key, as we also apply it to the political process, as we also apply it to the economic process. Synthesis, again, is an aspect of Maddamer. This is, the conception that the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. I think this best explains Ethiopian and Ethiopians. We are greater than, the sum of each individuals that live in Ethiopia, and that's what synthesis is about. The other is symbiosis. In the case of symbiosis, it seeks to create a system that benefits everyone without harm. So there is a mutually beneficial engagement, a shared arrangement where both actors will become eventual winners. That's what symbiosis is, and Maddamer's conception wants to come up with a win-win solution for everyone that's involved in this process. And the last one is, I think, symmetry. Symmetry, it's about that balancing act that I earlier mentioned, situation that enables a healthy existence for all actors in a system. We need to do a balancing act to maintain equilibrium in whatever business that we may be engaging in. Eventually, we will come up with a system that's well-functioning, a system that will result and achieve prosperity for the country. So what are the fundamentals of Maddamer, the necessary basic conditions? The necessary basic conditions for Maddamer are three. Number one, it requires everyone to take initiative. Number two, of course, there is a need to do some balancing, the need to create equilibrium. The third is we need to have a common goal as a nation. And I'm not going to discuss each one by one. I will just go into the goals of Maddamer. Now, we have seen the meaning of Maddamer. We have seen the 6 pillars of Maddamer. We have also looked at the fundamentals of Maddamer. But eventually, what is it that it seeks to achieve by implementing Maddamer in Ethiopia as a governing philosophy of the government? Number one, it seeks to achieve national unity in diversity. That's one important aspect of Maddamer. There has been so much work that has been done by rather emphasizing the differences among the different nations and nationalities in Ethiopia. I think so much work needs to be done now to bring together every nation and nationality in Ethiopia. So that work of building a national unity is, a challenging task that awaits us. So this is one goal of Maddamer. The second is we have to respect citizens' dignity. Citizens should feel proud of their nation as a country, and that would require observing the fundamental freedoms and human rights of each and every one of the Ethiopian citizens. So that's, again, the second goal of Maddamer. And the holy glare of Maddamer would be prosperity. When we say prosperity, it looks at it from all different dimensions. We're just talking about economic prosperity. We are also talking about political prosperity. We are talking about social prosperity. Every aspect of prosperity will be realized through Maddamer. So to summarize, Maddamer is, a homegrown notion offered for the common future of the nation. So this is a pragmatic solution born out of the recognition that for so long we have experimented and implemented policies that were not, in fact, well suited to the prevailing realities in Ethiopia. Let's now have a homegrown solution that takes into account the prevailing reality in the country. Maddamer is a road to a victory. It's a win-win formula for the nation. It's also the way to fulfill the fundamental needs of human beings and both direct and indirect needs of human beings. It also relies on building upon positive political and economic gains. It seeks to rectify mistakes and also strives to achieve the interests and needs of future generations. So in sum, Maddamer is the way to ensure prosperity and hence our survival. Thank you for listening.
Just to summarize why it's important for us to delve a little bit into the basics and why we took a bit of time to understand the basics of Maddamer, because it gives a rationale for explaining the political, how Maddamer views the politics, how Maddamer views the economy, and how Maddamer also views foreign relations. So to just summarize it for you, balance is the ultimate goal. There is a place for everyone, taking stock of prevailing reality, and I think over the past and a half, you have seen the manifestation within the administration as well being very forthcoming in terms of where are we, how did we get here, and what do we need to own up to. The second component, acknowledging human nature and human potential, but really as well being able to harness it and divert that aspect of human potential and human nature of competition and cooperation for building a shared future. And finally, the third aspect, outlining solutions and responding to the prevailing reality as well, are key components to it. I just want to highlight at this point as well, while the book in Amharic and Oromifa came out about 2 weeks ago, for our international community, the book in English will come out sometime in December as well, so we will inform you when it's available. I would like to introduce right now Dr. Gideon Timotheos, who's going to be taking us into Maddamer and politics.
Good afternoon, everyone. So in my presentation today, I will provide a very brief overview of the political aspects and manifestation of Maddamer. So the outline of my presentation would be as displayed on the screen. First, I'll discuss Maddamer as a political orientation and try to outline its general features as a political direction. Then I'll discuss the ultimate objective of Maddamer. Then I'll proceed to discussing Maddamer and democracy, the commitment of Maddamer for building a democratic Ethiopia, and also the challenges that are identified in the book in relation to building a democratic Ethiopia. And finally, the solutions and way forward that is presented in the book. So in the interest of time, I'll directly go to the first part of my presentation. So Maddamer is not, as presented in the book, it's not an all-encompassing dogmatic ideology. Rather, we could describe it as a political orientation. The approach to politics that the author argues for in the book is a centrist politics, a politics that transcends ideological camps, ideological labels, and that is rather intended to be pragmatic and reflective. So the author discusses at length the importance of trying to address our problems in a pragmatic manner, trying to analyze and understand our problems not through ideological lenses, but as they are on the ground, as they are in the reality, facing them and trying to understand them, and then trying to provide workable solutions, solutions that will really overcome our challenge and problems. So there is a lot of emphasis on the need to be pragmatic instead of being dogmatic and fixated on ideological labels and ideological guides. So the author argues that whatever solution, whatever problems we are facing, instead of trying to provide a solution that is prescribed by this or that ideological camp, it's better to ask what will work, what will really enable us to overcome this challenge and provide solutions. So it's a very hard-nosed, pragmatic approach, but it's a pragmatism that is that operates within a certain normative principle. So it's a principled pragmatism, and it is argued in the book that this kind of centrist politics, this kind of pragmatism, could provide a basis for an inclusive big tent politics. So it's meant to provide a departure from a political history, a political trajectory in which there has been a lot of division, a lot of labeling and confrontation, animosity, and so on. So instead of that, the kind of approach that Maddamer would like to bring towards our politics is a more inclusive, accommodative politics that will accommodate people from different ideological background, people from different ethnic communities, cultural and linguistic backgrounds. So this is the kind of approach towards politics. So as has been pointed out by my colleague, Commissioner Abebe earlier, there is a lot of emphasis on celebrating, recognizing and building upon our past successes. So the author wants us to depart from this practice of denouncing or delegitimizing everything that has happened in the past, and he argues for the importance of building upon past previous successes, the success of previous administrations, previous generations, and also recognizing and rectifying mistakes committed in the past with an overall perspective of safeguarding and advancing the interests of future generations. Now, the ultimate objective of Meddamer as a political or economic orientation is bringing about multidimensional prosperity, prosperity not only in the material sense, but in a much wider sense. So the kind of prosperous society that the author argues we need to build in Ethiopia is a society that is capable of ensuring the material well-being of all members of the society, ensuring the equal dignity of all members of society, regardless of their ethnicity, gender, or what have you, and also a society that is capable of ensuring the equal liberty or freedom of all citizens. So an approach to politics that takes into account the multifaceted needs of human beings and trying to build a society and a state that will be able to address these various needs. So having this as a background, when we come to the diagnosis of Ethiopia's political problem and the prevailing situation in Ethiopia, what the author argues is, the author argues that for most of our modern history, Ethiopian governments have been faced with existential threats to the independence and territorial integrity of the Ethiopian state, and also threats to the various administrations. And the fact that these kind of threats were eminent has meant that the governments were preoccupied with tackling these threats, be it to the state or to the regime. And this has meant that the governments really didn't have that much time, resource, or attention that they could devote to addressing other needs of the society, political, economic, and social needs. And the author argues that this has led to discontent and grievances among the public at large, which has led to protests and oppression, and our governments have very often resorted to violent oppression as a response to the protests and demands from the public. So the author argues that our history is marked by or characterized by a vicious cycle of oppression and violent protest. And he argues that unless we break this vicious cycle of oppression and protest, things will keep getting worse and worse, and ultimately it will lead to a catastrophic result. So the ultimate political objective of the Meddamer project, according to the author, in the political realm is breaking this cycle by building a democratic society. So the antidote to this problem, to the problem that has been diagnosed, the prescription is building a robust democracy in Ethiopia. And as you'll see in the book later on, the author discusses various approaches towards building a democracy and argues that within our current context, the kind of democracy we should build in Ethiopia is an inclusive, consultational democracy. So what he means by an inclusive consultational democracy is a democracy that strikes